What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? Let's dive in. Story 1. The last 24 hours before my father passed from stage 4 lung cancer were devastating. He was taken to the ER and transferred to the ICU. Due to strict hospital pandemic protocols, my mom, sister, and I weren't allowed to visit. We called and texted him all day but got no response. My mom even spoke with a nurse who said he was alert and responsive. Sadly, he died unexpectedly at 3:30 a.m. By the time we were let in, he was unconscious. We said goodbye, and he passed. Later, while my mom rested, I started arranging for his cremation and going through the belongings the hospital gave us. His phone was among them. Hoping for comfort, I reread our final messages to him. None had been opened. I figured maybe he was too unwell to reply. Then I saw a messaging app one barely recognized. Out of curiosity, I opened it and saw one contact. They'd been talking nonstop. The messages were full of affection and concern about his health. Going further back, I realized this wasn't just a friend, it was an emotional affair. A week later, I reached out to her. She was 19 and had met my dad when she was 17. He'd been her school bus driver. They'd been together for almost 2 years. My dad was 66. Knowing he spent his last hours speaking to someone younger than my nieces was devastating. I hope he found comfort in it, but it's a truth I'll carry forever. A truth that shattered my view of him, one I'll never get closure on. Story 2. She didn't have kids or a husband. Just me, her best friend of nearly 8 years. When my now husband and I moved out of state, she convinced us to come back to be closer to her. After a year of trying a new city, we had no strong ties and figured, why not? She was like family. For the first year back, she was at our house nearly every night. We laughed, cooked together, everything felt perfect. But gradually, she began coming between my husband and me. After arguments, she would text us both, agreeing with each of us separately, subtly building resentment. She told me if things didn't work out, I could always move in with her, that we'd have a beautiful life together. With my husband, she shared her fertility struggles and hinted she wanted a child who looked like him, saying she just needed a donor. Eventually, my husband and I compared texts. It became horrifyingly clear. She wanted to have his baby, raise it with me, and cut him out. When we confronted her, she denied it all and went into a rage. She began showing up uninvited, banging on the door, demanding we let her in. We had to move and change our numbers. It still unnerves me how deeply obsessive and manipulative she had become. I learned the hard way that love from someone doesn't always mean safety. Story 3. After my great-uncle passed away, my family discovered something horrifying. While cleaning his attic, we found a box filled with memorabilia from his time as a high-ranking Klan member. The box had photos of rallies, hangings, and cross burnings in rural Georgia. We were shaken to the core. Suddenly, his hostility toward his black nurse made terrible sense. My family was crushed with shame. I was only 16 and had no say, but the adults decided to burn everything. We held prayer services at our church to acknowledge the victims and seek healing. Sometimes I wonder if we should have kept the evidence to give closure to others hurt by him. But at the time, all anyone wanted was to erase that part of our family. His grave was removed to stop anyone from honoring him, and his name was removed from our family records. We had always taken pride in our family's history of inclusion. Some ancestors marched for civil rights, and one helped people escape slavery. This discovery broke that image. We now try to honor those better values, but the weight of that secret has never fully lifted. Story 4. This isn't something someone confessed to me, but it's an unsettling pattern of comments made by a family member about a well-known murder case in the Midwest. The victims were reportedly fed to pigs, and while the culprits were arrested, no remains were found. Over the years, this relative would make vague remarks in a hushed tone. Never anything concrete, but enough to raise eyebrows. Their job at the time? Working in a meatpacking facility owned by a family member who used to be in a biker gang. That connection always made things feel darker. At dinners, they'd go into disturbing detail about pig processing, always pigs, making people uncomfortable. Maybe it's just a love of true crime, or maybe they know more than they let on. I've thought about asking them straight up next time I see them. Then again, maybe it's best I don't. Story 5. My closest friend of over 2 decades once told me they believed they were a sociopath, and said it with pride. They followed it up with, "I really don't care about anyone but me." I was stunned and tried to reassure them they weren't like that, bringing up examples of their kindness. But as life moved forward, I started to observe more. Eventually, I saw that they'd been right. They were manipulative, emotionally harmful, and brought toxic people into my life. People who'd try to isolate me or ruin me if I disagreed with them. The emotional digs and passive-aggressive tactics built up until one day, I finally had enough. It wasn't a sudden aha moment. It took years, but once I saw them clearly, I cut ties. The healing was slow, but freeing. It felt like I'd been slowly poisoned for years and finally yanked the needle out. I'm still recovering, but life feels so much lighter now. Story 6. On my mom's side, trauma is always turned into jokes. Horrific things are told as funny stories during holidays. My grandfather, trying to shoot my grandma, shared with chuckles. My mom being beaten for saying an actor was attractive, told like a sitcom gag. But some things they don't joke about, those are buried. And I've only caught glimpses. One came when my grandma offhandedly mentioned my grandfather had been in the Klan and proud of his efficiency. Another came later, when I learned he only visited our side of the family because he didn't know where his other kids lived. We couldn't avoid him, even if we wanted to. Everything clicked after that. The odd vibe in his house, his new wife's grandkids playing with rats dressed in Barbie clothes. It was a strange, unsettling place, and now I understand why it always felt so wrong. Story 7. When my fiancé and I taught in a remote Alaskan village, we became close with a co-worker, a kind older man who felt like an uncle. We'd have dinner, go hiking, even stay at his house during trips. One day he introduced us to a girl he said was his niece. She was supposedly finishing school online and couldn't live with her dad. It sounded believable. By spring, she vanished. He said she reconciled with her father. But the truth came out soon after. She wasn't his niece. She was a missing teen he'd groomed online. Her dad found her after she reached out to a local woman. State troopers returned her home. That summer, he went to court. Turns out, he'd also tried to lure another girl online. This time, it was a sting operation. We were horrified. Someone we saw as a friend turned out to be a predator. That revelation still chills me. Story 8. I have almost zero contact with my extended family, and I'm at peace with that. Outside of my immediate family, the rest have shown themselves to be untrustworthy and self-serving. They betrayed my father. After his mom passed, her estate was meant to help care for him. But when her second husband died, he left the inheritance to everyone but my dad, saying we weren't real family. They let my dad be cheated out of what was meant for him and kept quiet. Years later, they tried to reconnect. I said no. They profited from betrayal and never worked for it. I won't pretend things are okay just so they can feel better. That money wasn't about greed. It was about care that was denied. Story 9. My dad's life was chaos, full of cheating and lies. He had an affair with my mom while still with my brother's mother, though my mom didn't know. They married, and I was born a year later. But he kept cheating. Even when his mother was dying, he found time to sneak off with other women. After my parents split, he married someone in Mexico the same age as my older brother. When he died of a heart attack while driving, we found his phone and saw what we expected, more cheating. Contacts labeled lawyer or boss were women. We wiped the phone, doing him one last favor. He was unfaithful to the end. A troubled man, yes, but that's another story entirely. Story 10. About 6 years ago, I had to find a new place to live quickly. My landlord announced repairs, and I had to vacate. I posted online and got a reply from someone I recognized from anime cons. We agreed to meet over food. He mentioned having blackouts, waking up places without memory, once with blood on his hands. I acted calm but immediately decided, no way am I living with this guy. Weeks later, whispers started about him and a con incident, something under investigation. Years passed, and I mostly forgot, until a friend messaged me. He'd been convicted of raping a girl at knife point during a con. Worse, she wasn't even his intended victim. He planned to hurt someone else. The cops found a kit on him, knife, rope, tape. He even admitted he thought about murder. It was horrifying. Friends who had defended him were shattered. The ripple effect of what he did reached everyone. I still think about how close I came to living with him. Story 21. My older brother started dating my best friend when she was 16 and he was 19. She was nervous to tell me, but I chose to support them, even though it felt a little off. In the beginning, it seemed fine, but I noticed little lies in how she presented herself, saying she loved things like boxing, yet always refusing to train with us. After 3 months, she called me saying she had broken up with him because her parents disapproved. I told her it was her choice. Later, she called again in tears, saying she was proud of herself for ending things. But when I saw the breakup messages, I was stunned. She'd told him he was boring and that their relationship meant nothing. It crushed him, and for the first time, I had to comfort him like a big sister. A few days later at the mall, she joked about flirting with a friend's rich dad. Her brother shut her down, but her behavior started changing after that. She grew cold, distant. Her mom began acting strangely too, accusing me of disrespect and cutting off conversations. Then one day, she ghosted me and blocked our other close friend. Her mom posted online, "Friends come and go, but family stays forever," tagging her daughter. I'd never spoken badly about her. A year later, she reached out. She revealed my brother had been controlling and told her lies about me to isolate her. It crushed me. I didn't expect betrayal from either of them. Story 22. At university, I joined a tight-knit community of friends who shared everything: dinners, groceries, and support for those in need. Most of us were activists. A co-worker of mine had been kicked out of her home for being queer and was grieving her grandmother's decline. I introduced her to the group, and they welcomed her. My mom even let her live in my old room rent-free. But after a few weeks, my mom called and said she needed to leave. The girl accused my mom of being homophobic. My group mostly took her side, and I was slowly iced out. Only a few friends believed my mom. I went home and found my old room trashed, garbage bags everywhere, dishes in the trash, and an overwhelming mess. My mom told me the girl was drinking, using substances, and had screamed at her. She begged to stay, so we gave her until the end of the month. When we cleaned the room, we found checks in her late grandmother's name. She'd been forging them to buy expensive art materials. We contacted her family and learned the truth. She wasn't kicked out for being gay. She'd been stealing from her dying grandma. We reported the fraud, but when I tried to explain, the group still didn't believe me. Only one person with experience in addiction recognized the signs. Losing those friendships still hurts, but I know the truth. Story 23. This still gives me chills. I was living with my then boyfriend, now ex. He struggled with mental health, but refused therapy. One night, during a quiet moment, he casually confessed to killing someone who had harmed his sister. I didn't know if it was real or meant to scare me, but I was terrified. He had already threatened me before, and now I felt trapped. One afternoon while he was at work, I used his computer to transfer a game. What I found instead were files, guides on hiding bodies, bomb-making tutorials, and the anarchist cookbook. When I asked him about it, he looked me in the eye and said, "I don't care about you or anyone else." That was it. I ended things immediately, and he moved out. Not long after, my cat vanished. I'll never know if it was coincidence, but it still breaks my heart. 2 years later, a stray cat wandered into my yard. I gave him some chicken, and he never left. He's curled up on my chest as I type this. I'm grateful every day for his presence. Story 24. My uncle is one of the kindest men I know. Growing up without my dad around, he stepped in, funny, generous, and amazing with kids. He even learned how to use Discord just to connect with his niece. My mom calls him the best brother she could ask for. But his past? It's something few know. As a teen, he was violent and cruel to my mom. At 17, he got caught in a gang-related crime and went to prison. While inside, he was attacked by a white supremacist gang and disfigured. After release, he joined a biker crew and disappeared. For 2 decades, no one knew if he was alive. He was later imprisoned again for manslaughter. Eventually, he married someone who helped him leave that life. It took years, but after a massive gang takedown, he finally got out for good. Most of the family doesn't know this side of him. Even the older generation keeps quiet. By the time I was born, he was a changed man. My mom finally told me his story in my 20s. Despite everything, he became the most loving person in my life. His past may be dark, but today he's the brightest light I know. Story 25. A few years ago, my partner and I joined a regular D&D group through his old co-workers. One member, G, was someone we only knew through these games. He lived nearby and always seemed nice enough. One week, he missed a session. No text, no warning. Then days later, he messaged an apology. At the next game, he asked to hang out after. During that conversation, he told us why he had missed the last session. He said the police had taken his phone and computer. When we asked why, he admitted it. He had been viewing illegal content involving children. He insisted he never hurt anyone, and that it was a substitute for therapy he couldn't afford. We were speechless. He started talking about therapy costs, but we couldn't move past what he said. After he left, we decided to message him. We told him he couldn't be part of the group anymore and that we weren't comfortable being around him. He agreed and left. But for weeks, I felt sick. He had been in our house. He had a young child. We never told anyone in the group, as promised, but I still wonder if that was the right call. I don't live there anymore, but the memory still makes my skin crawl. Story 26. There was an older man in our community, known for helping immigrant families. He taught English, gave them places to stay, and helped them settle in. Despite his wealth, he lived simply and never married. He was admired by everyone. But my grandmother, who knew him well, told me the truth when I was older. As a young man during World War II, he had been part of a violent extremist army. He and his friend found a stash of Nazi gold and fled the region, killing their way to safety. They made it to Canada and split the treasure, worth millions today. Years later, his friend died and left him everything. Overcome with guilt, he devoted his life to helping others. He never returned to his homeland and barely spoke of his youth. His funeral was small but deeply emotional. Families he'd helped came from all over. My grandmother said she once loved him, but never acted on it out of loyalty to her husband. His story is one of redemption. Despite his dark beginnings, he spent his life making things right. Though I know he carried that guilt until his last breath. Story 27. My parents used to live in a rural area where everyone knew each other. One elderly couple a few houses down were especially kind. The husband gave rides to people without transportation, including once taking my younger sister to a bus stop 8 miles away. One day, their house went dark. The truck didn't move. Their cats wandered to neighbors for food. 2 weeks passed with no sign of them. Concerned locals called the police. They were told the couple had been in a car accident and were hospitalized. A month later, they returned. The husband was in a wheelchair and nearly nonverbal. The wife had visible scars. No one pushed for details. Everyone assumed they didn't want to relive the trauma. They adapted to a new routine. She wheeled him around the neighborhood, chatting with neighbors. A year later, he died. A few months after that, she passed away too. Then their son came to handle their affairs, and the truth came out. The husband had suffered a severe psychotic break and stabbed his wife over a dozen times. She survived, called for help, and never told anyone. She said she didn't want him remembered as a monster. That's how powerful love and silence can be. Story 28. When I was 26, my best friend went to prison for causing a deadly car accident. He had no record, took full responsibility, and got 2 years, serving just over a year. I visited him 3 times, often traveling with his fiancée. On the drives, we'd talk casually. She always spoke about how much she loved him and couldn't wait for him to come home. She promised to wait as long as it took. His mother passed while he was inside, so her support meant a lot. There were always rumors she had cheated, but we didn't believe them. Then, on one trip, she left her phone in the car. A message popped up that said, "Can't wait to do it again." That day, I sat with them in the visiting room as she spoke about their future together, knowing she was cheating. I didn't tell him, not while he was grieving in prison. He found out shortly after getting out. She left him 2 weeks before the wedding, costing them their £5,000 deposit. Turned out, she'd been seeing her manager the entire time. I was devastated for him. He'd already lost everything, and then lost her too. Story 29. In high school, I had problems with my stepmom and had to move out. A good friend's family let me stay with them to finish school. My friend was biracial. His father was tall and white, his mom tiny and Asian. One day, we went to the woods for beers and stories. One guy shared that his brother died while fleeing from the police. He'd picked up friends for what turned out to be a violent assault. Then my host friend shared his story. His dad had gone to a reunion, reconnected with an old flame, and announced he wanted a divorce. One night, while my friend and his sister were watching TV, they heard weird noises upstairs. At first, they thought their parents were laughing, maybe reconciling. Then came a scream. They rushed up and found their mother covered in blood, holding a knife. She'd attacked their father in his sleep, first with an axe, then a kitchen knife. His eyelid was nearly cut off. That night, I came home and made sure to be on my absolute best behavior. Story 30. I used to attend festivals with the same circle, friends, friends of friends, and the occasional new person. One guy, Jay, was someone I only saw at events. We always got along, shared deep chats, and danced together. I liked him. Then one day, someone dropped a news link in our group chat. The man in the article looked like Jay, but with a different name. Turns out, that was his full name. It said he drove into an oncoming truck while being chased by police. Everyone thought it was a tragic accident. Later that day, more details came out. He had intentionally crashed. The police were pursuing him as a suspect in a child trafficking ring. Even worse, he'd been caught fleeing a murder scene in Eastern Europe. We were all shaken. He had seemed so normal, so safe. But he had been living a secret, horrifying life. Even now, I feel sick thinking about it. It was a terrifying reminder. You never really know who someone is. Story 31. At my previous job, I had a manager who was kind but a heavy drinker. She knew I'd gone through a rough marriage, and one evening, after a few too many drinks, she confided her darkest secret. She told me the real reason she'd taken medical leave the previous year wasn't a ruptured ovarian cyst. It was because her ex had attacked her. He strangled her with a rope cord until she blacked out and assaulted her. She became pregnant from that. Petite and naturally thin, she didn't show much and told no one. At 7.5 months, she gave birth to a baby boy who looked just like his father. She gave him up for adoption and kept using the cyst story at work. Her ex never knew about the child. She lived in fear that if he ever found out, he'd try to find her or the boy. It was a closed adoption, but part of the agreement allows the child to search for her at 18. She dreads that day. The next morning, she acted like she never told me. I left that job shortly after, but I still see her sometimes. When people ask if she plans to have children, I notice the way her expression shifts. My heart breaks knowing the pain she silently carries. Story 32. I once worked with someone who faked having cancer for years. To this day, I don't fully understand how they pulled it off. They fooled family, friends, co-workers, even their own children. At work, they were beloved. They asked co-workers to drive them to appointments and pick them up afterward, claiming to be too weak. They eventually rose to a prominent role in a national nonprofit. During that time, we even organized a fundraiser for them, raising over $50,000. They said the money was for treatment overseas. Later, we learned it had all gone toward a luxury trip. They claimed it was their last chance at survival. Their partner planned a rushed wedding, so they could be married before the end. But eventually, inconsistencies caught up with them. An internal investigation exposed the truth. They had never been sick. It was a full-on scam. They were eventually charged with fraud. The betrayal was staggering. We had cried for this person, raised money, and poured love into them. I still can't fully wrap my head around it. It's disturbing how far someone can go, and how easily trust can be weaponized. Story 33. 3 years ago, my mom passed away at 48. After her death, we were given her journals and some personal belongings. Reading them tore me apart. She had written about abuse we never knew she endured. She described being hit, burned with hot food, and assaulted while she was sick and vomiting. None of us knew. She carried those horrors alone. As her firstborn, I always felt we had a deep bond. She'd cry when I left after visiting, and always smiled when I arrived, even though I lived just a short drive away. I used to think she was just really affectionate. Now I wonder if she felt safe with me around. I wish she had told me. I would have protected her, no question. She was my queen, my light, and I didn't even know how much she suffered. I live with that regret now. She didn't deserve that pain, or to carry it in silence. Story 34. Growing up, the story about my grandmother's death was that she was murdered during a robbery gone wrong. She worked with the police, and her car and purse were targeted. That's what we were always told. My mom was young when it happened and deeply affected. But years later, while clearing out the family home after my great-grandparents passed, we learned the truth. My grandmother had struggled with mental health and the pressures of raising 2 young kids, mostly alone. One day, she locked my mom and aunt in a room for nap time, then took her own life in the living room. My grandfather came home to find her, and their daughters still locked inside. This happened in the 80s, when mental illness was swept under the rug. The family made up the robbery story to avoid judgment. My mom stayed with her father, who later died from alcohol poisoning. Her half-sister, my aunt, was raised by her biological father and disconnected from us for years. They only reconnected recently, and during one talk, my aunt said she sometimes feels like doing what mom did. Now I understand the depth of what my mother carried all her life. Story 35. When I was in college, I dated a guy who seemed intense but charismatic. After a few months, his temper started to show. He'd throw things during arguments, call me names, and gaslight me into thinking it was all my fault. He once broke my laptop during a fight, then claimed I did it. He isolated me from friends and made me quit a part-time job he didn't approve of. Eventually I got out, but not before the worst part. Months after the breakup, a mutual friend contacted me, terrified. She had just gone on one date with him, and he'd already become obsessive. She showed me dozens of messages, him threatening self-harm if she didn't reply, showing up at her work, calling her family. I shared my experience with her, and we filed a report together. He wasn't charged, but it was enough to get a no-contact order. I still get chills thinking about what might have happened if I'd stayed longer. Abuse isn't always obvious at first. Sometimes it's charm wrapped in control. Story 36. When I was in high school, I had a teacher everyone adored. He was the cool teacher, played guitar, gave thoughtful advice, and treated students with respect. I looked up to him. A lot of us did. Years after I graduated, I saw his face on the news. He'd been arrested for possessing and distributing illegal images of minors. My heart sank. He wasn't just arrested, he had been under investigation for years. Worse, he'd kept teaching during that time. They found hidden cameras and thousands of images on multiple devices. He had recorded students, our classmates, without anyone knowing. I was never targeted, but the betrayal felt personal. We had trusted him. Some of my friends refused to believe it. Others broke down, realizing they'd shared personal things with him. The school tried to distance itself, but the damage was done. He'll never teach again. But the scars he left, those will take longer to fade. Story 37. One of my high school friends had a troubled home life, so my family would let her stay with us. She was sweet, creative, and funny, one of the kindest people I knew. Over time, we drifted apart. Years later, I heard she was working in social services and was married with a child. Then, her name appeared in the local news. She had been arrested for child abuse. Apparently, her daughter had been taken into care, and there were signs of neglect and emotional harm. I couldn't believe it. This was someone who had once been like a sister to me. Someone who swore she'd break every cycle of abuse she grew up with. To this day, I don't understand what happened. I still think about her, how kind she was, how much pain she must have carried. Maybe she wasn't equipped to parent. Or maybe the past caught up to her. Whatever the case, it's a heartbreaking reminder that not everyone escapes their trauma. Story 38. My cousin was the golden child. Smart, athletic, charming. Everyone assumed he'd do big things. In his senior year, he got a scholarship to a top university. Then one night, he got caught with drugs at a party. Instead of owning up, he blamed the girl who brought them. She was suspended, and he kept his scholarship. I found out because she was my friend and confided in me. She said he pressured her into taking the fall, promising he'd fix it later. He never did. Years passed. He graduated, got a great job, and even gave a speech at my aunt's retirement party about honesty and hard work. Every time I see him, I think about what he did to that girl. She dropped out of school and moved to another city. He never paid for what he did, but someone else did. Story 39. When I was younger, I idolized my uncle. He was funny, confident, and seemed to have it all together. But one night, after too many drinks, he pulled me aside and told me something I still don't know how to process. He said he had accidentally killed someone in a bar fight overseas while in the military. He told me the man had grabbed a girl and wouldn't let go. He punched him once, and the man hit his head on a pipe. He died instantly. There were no charges, he said. It was ruled self-defense. But he's haunted by it. Every year on the same date, he disappears. He goes off the grid for a day or two. I never told anyone else in the family. But now I understand why he always avoids violence, even in movies. He carries that weight, even if the world doesn't see it. Story 40. At my first full-time job, I worked closely with a woman named Emma. She was in her 30s, kind of a loner, but sweet. We bonded quickly, and she eventually told me why she was so reserved. Years earlier, she had been involved in a car accident that killed her fiancé. She'd been drinking, not heavily, but enough to put her slightly over the limit. They were arguing, and she lost control of the car. He died instantly. She wasn't charged, there was no intent, and he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. But she's never forgiven herself. She moved to a new town, changed jobs, and started over. But every day, she said she wakes up thinking about him. She avoids relationships now. She told me that grief doesn't just sit in your chest, it follows you like a shadow. I think about her often. Sometimes the kindest people are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. Story 41. When I was a teenager, I volunteered at a senior living facility. One of the residents, Mr. G, was a quiet man in his 80s who loved jigsaw puzzles and classical music. We got along really well, He reminded me of my grandfather, always gentle and polite. One afternoon, a new resident recognized him and visibly froze. She refused to eat dinner in the same room and eventually asked to be moved to another wing. Confused, I asked a staff member about it. She sighed and told me the truth. Mr. G had once been a high-ranking prison officer in the 1960s, known for using brutal tactics. The woman had been wrongly imprisoned during the civil rights era, and Mr. G was one of the men responsible for her abuse. Apparently, he had been investigated but never charged. He had spent the last decades of his life in peace, but she never got justice. I still remember how kind he was to me, but now I can't separate the man I knew from the man he used to be. Some truths don't have tidy endings. They just sit there, unresolved. Story 42. When I was 22, I started dating a guy I'd met at a local gig. He was funny, artistic, and a bit of a rebel. He always wore a long coat and carried a notebook full of poems. I thought he was just eccentric, but one night, while we were out walking, he told me he didn't believe in consequences. He said he'd once set fire to a small abandoned building, just to watch it burn. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He described the crackling wood and the heat on his face with this calm, eerie joy. Later that night, I saw the notebook. It wasn't just poetry. It was pages of violent fantasies, detailed descriptions of things he'd done or wanted to do. I ended things the next day. He didn't take it well and began showing up at my job. Eventually, I filed a report. He stopped after that. I still wonder if those stories were true, or just delusions. Either way, it was a glimpse into a darkness I hope to never encounter again. Story 43. In college, I became close friends with a girl named Tasha. She was bubbly, always upbeat, and had the best laugh. She never talked about her family, though. Just said they weren't in the picture. One night after too much wine, she opened up. Her parents had been part of a cult. She'd grown up on a remote farm where the group followed strict rules and performed bizarre rituals. She said she escaped when she was 14, ran away during a storm, and hitchhiked to a nearby city. She lived in shelters, lied about her age, and eventually made it to foster care. I was stunned. She'd never once seemed like someone who had gone through that. She told me laughter was her armor. We lost touch after graduation, but I still think about her resilience. It's wild how people can rebuild themselves from ashes and still manage to shine. Story 44. When I was little, my cousin used to babysit me. She was 5 years older, super cool, and always brought candy. As I got older, we drifted. Then one day, she popped up in the news. She'd been arrested for attempting to smuggle drugs across the border. According to the article, it wasn't a one-time thing. She was part of a small trafficking operation. I didn't want to believe it, so I asked my aunt. She admitted they'd known for a while but were hoping she'd grow out of it. My cousin had a daughter by then. The courts gave custody to the father. Sometimes I look at old photos of her holding me as a baby and wonder, how did it come to this? She was my first hero. And now, I barely recognize the person she became. Story 45. I once dated a guy who was obsessed with crime documentaries. Like really obsessed. At first, I thought it was a harmless interest. Plenty of people love true crime. But then he started talking about unsolvable cases in this weird, excited way. He'd get animated describing ways someone could get away with murder. It stopped being a quirk and started feeling dangerous. One night, I found a folder in his drawer labeled Exit Plans. It had maps, fake identities, and lists of emergency contacts in other countries. He said it was just for fun. I didn't believe him. I broke up with him the next day and blocked him everywhere. Months later, a mutual friend told me he'd moved out of the country without saying goodbye. Sometimes I wonder what he was preparing for, and if I dodged something much worse than I'll ever know. Story 46. I used to work at a daycare during summer breaks. One of the regular moms was always a bit odd. She'd bring her kid in super early and pick them up late. Never smiled. One day, she didn't show up. The next day, police came asking questions. Turns out, she'd been living under a fake name for over a decade, wanted in another state for kidnapping her own child from foster care. The child she brought in wasn't even legally hers anymore. No one at the daycare had any idea. She had all the right paperwork, new ID, forged custody documents. When they took the child, I remember how quietly he went. No tears. Just resignation. I still think about that kid. He probably never knew the full story. And I wonder who really failed him in the end. Story 47. I had a coworker named Dan who was quiet but kind. Always brought donuts on Fridays and remembered everyone's birthdays. After he left the company, he sent me a long email. He confessed that he'd been in witness protection. Years ago, he'd testified against a criminal ring he was forced into as a teen. His testimony led to multiple convictions, and he'd been relocated 3 times. The company didn't know. His name wasn't even real. He said he was tired of hiding and planned to move again, to start fresh once more. He asked me not to reply. I never saw or heard from him again. I don't even know what his real name was. But I still think about him whenever I see powdered donuts. Story 48. A friend from high school, Maria, was always the mom of our group, organized, kind, steady. After graduation, she went into nursing. Years later, I learned she had been caught stealing painkillers from her hospital. She had developed an addiction and began altering patient charts to cover her tracks. Eventually, she was caught and lost her license. She moved back in with her parents and disappeared from social media. I saw her again once, working at a gas station. We locked eyes, and I smiled, but she looked away. I wish I'd said something, but I didn't know if I was someone she wanted from her past. Addiction changes people, but I still remember who she was. Story 49. My aunt always seemed like the most stable person in our family. She had a great job, nice house, and raised 2 kids on her own after her husband passed. Then one day she just disappeared. She left a note saying she was taking time, but no one heard from her for 6 months. Eventually, we found out she'd been arrested for attempting to buy a fake identity and flee the country. Why? Because she was drowning in debt, credit cards, medical bills, mortgage payments. She'd kept it all hidden behind a smile. Now she lives in a shared apartment, working 2 part-time jobs. She says it's a second chance. And in a weird way, I think it is. Sometimes the breakdown is the breakthrough. Story 50. When I was 16, my best friend told me her dad wasn't who she thought he was. She had been snooping through her mom's files and found adoption paperwork. But the strange part? Her parents had never adopted. She was the one who had been adopted, without ever being told. Her mom confessed it after being confronted. Her biological parents were close family friends who gave her up when they were teenagers. She'd grown up seeing them at holidays, calling them aunt and uncle. After learning the truth, everything felt like a lie to her. She cut contact with almost everyone for a while. Years later, she reconnected with her birth mom, but never forgave her adoptive parents fully. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just changes the lock.